The Unravelling of Autonomy, Familial Rule, Institutional Decay, and Baghdad's Strategic Gains in the Kurdistan Region of Iraq. Abstract. The Kurdistan Region of Iraq, KRI, has witnessed a significant erosion of its hard-won autonomy since the 2017 independence referendum. While constitutionally recognized as a federal entity, its practical governance has increasingly devolved into a system dominated by powerful families and their respective party militias, undermining legitimate institutions. This paper argues that this internal decay, historically rooted in armed conflict and territorial division, coupled with Baghdad's strategic exploitation of the KRI's fragilities and the pervasive influence of regional powers, Iran and Turkey, has fundamentally weakened the region's federal status. Crucially, this has led to a profound disillusionment among the Kurdish population, who now prioritize basic financial stability and peace over nationalist ideals, further eroding the KRG's legitimacy and presenting a critical challenge to its future. The paper also speculates on the KRG's missed potential for comprehensive development had it established genuinely independent and effective civil institutions. Keywords: Kurdistan Region, Iraq, Federalism, Autonomy, Corruption, Peshmerga, KDP, PUK, Constitutionalism, Human Rights, Public Sentiment, Iran, Turkey. 1. Introduction, From Aspiring Statehood to Diminished Autonomy. For decades, the Kurdistan Region of Iraq, KRI, functioned as a unique semi-autonomous entity, a safe haven forged after the 1991 uprising and solidified by the 2005 Iraqi constitution, which formally recognized it as a federal region. This status granted the KRI its own parliament, government, judicial system, and security forces, Peshmerga, along with significant control over its oil resources. However, recent years have seen a precipitous decline in its independent standing. This article contends that the KRI's current predicament stems from a confluence of external pressures from Baghdad and regional powers, and, critically, deep-seated internal governance failures. This combination has transformed its federal status into a largely nominal designation, leading to a profound erosion of public trust in its leadership. Moreover, the historical trajectory of KRI governance reveals a critical missed opportunity for robust, sustainable development. To the 2017 referendum, a catalyst for contraction. The KRI's September 2017 independence referendum, driven primarily by the Kurdistan Democratic Party, KDP, under then-President Massoud Barzani, proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Intended as a leverage point for enhanced autonomy or statehood negotiations, it instead triggered a decisive federal backlash, revealing the KRG's geopolitical isolation and internal vulnerabilities. Territorial and military reversals. Immediately following the referendum, Iraqi federal forces, notably the Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF, launched a swift offensive in October 2017. This resulted in the KRG losing vast swathes of the disputed territories, including the oil-rich province of Kirkuk, which alone accounted for a significant portion of KRI's independent oil production and symbolic value. Reports indicate the KRG lost control over approximately 50% of the territory it had controlled prior to the offensive in the disputed areas. International Crisis Group, 2018. This military defeat, exacerbated by internal divisions within the Peshmerga, largely along KDP-PUK lines, with accusations of PUK elements facilitating federal advances in Kirkuk, severely damaged the KRG's military prestige. Loss of strategic control points. Baghdad swiftly imposed an international flight ban on KRI airports, Al Jazeera, 2017, and reasserted federal control over international border crossings. This stripped the KRG of vital symbols and instruments of sovereignty, placing all external entry and exit points under federal authority, similar to any other Iraqi governorate. The KRG was also compelled to formally recognize federal control over national ID and passport issuance, solidifying Baghdad's sovereign reach. Financial dislocation. The loss of Kirkuk's oil fields, which were crucial to the KRG's independent oil export scheme, dealt a devastating blow to its self-financing capabilities. This set the stage for chronic budget shortfalls and the subsequent salary crisis that would plague the region for years. 3. Financial crisis and Baghdad's reassertion of control, 2023 to 2025. The financial bedrock of the KRI's autonomy crumbled further in 2023, paving the way for Baghdad's decisive reassertion of financial and administrative authority. The oil export halt. In March 2023, the International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, in Paris ruled in favor of Baghdad against Turkey for allowing independent KRG oil exports. This ruling led to the cessation of KRI oil exports via the Iraq-Turkey pipeline, which had previously transported around 450,000 barrels per day. BPD, Amwaj.media, 2023. This single event directly cut off the KRG's primary independent revenue stream, leading to an estimated $11-13 billion in lost revenue for the KRG and Iraq combined in the year following the halt. Rudor, 2024. Federal Supreme Court mandates. A series of Iraqi Federal Supreme Court, FSC, rulings throughout 2022 to 2024 further undermined the KRG's independent oil and gas sector. These rulings declared KRG's independent oil and gas law unconstitutional and mandated that Baghdad directly control KRG oil sales and pay KRG civil servant salaries. The July 2025 agreement. The recent financial agreement, July 2025, a direct consequence of the KRG's inability to pay its civil servants, a payroll estimated to affect over 1.2 million public employees, pensioners, and welfare recipients, formalizes Baghdad's financial dominance. Rudor, 2025. The federal government will provide 1.1 trillion Iraqi dinars, IQD, monthly for salaries and other costs. This is contingent on the KRG delivering at least 230,000 BPD of oil to Iraq's SOMO for exports and remitting 120 billion IQD monthly from non-oil revenues. Argus Media, 2025. Draw Media, 2025. Critically, this agreement stipulates the finalization of the My Account project, which aims to domicile KRG civil servant salaries directly into federal bank accounts, bypassing KRG financial ministries entirely. Draw Media, 2025. This marks a profound shift from KRG self-financing to direct federal patronage, mirroring the financial structure of regular Iraqi governorates. For the internal decay, familial rule and institutional dysfunction. Beyond external pressures, the KRI's internal governance structure has systematically weakened its claim to a functional federal entity. Historical roots of division: the 1994 internal armed conflict, the seeds of the KRG's institutional fragmentation were sown early, most notably with the internal armed conflict, civil war, that erupted in 1994 between the KDP and PUK, Gunter, 1996. This devastating conflict led to the de facto division of the region into two distinct administrative zones: the Green Zone controlled by the PUK, centered in Suleimaniye, and the Yellow Zone controlled by the KDP, centered in Erbil and Duhok. International Crisis Group, 2011. This division, cemented by separate security forces, financial mechanisms, and administrative structures, has persisted despite the formal establishment of a unified KRG in 2005. This historical split means that even after the official unification, the region has effectively functioned as two semi-independent entities, preventing the development of truly cohesive, national institutions. Rule by families, not institutions. The Kurdistan region is effectively governed by two dominant families, the Barzanis, KDP, and the Talibanis, PUK, who control their respective parties and exert pervasive influence over all state institutions. This system fosters rampant nepotism and patronage, where appointments and economic opportunities are often based on loyalty to these ruling families and tribal affiliations rather than professional competence or public service. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, 2015. This constitutes a fundamental failure to establish a civil administration suitable for modern governance, prioritizing dynastic control over institutional professionalism and accountability. Divided administration and party militias. The legacy of the civil war means that security forces, Peshmerga, intelligence services, and even administrative functions largely operate under party, rather than unified national, command. Washington Institute for Near East Policy, 2022. This fragmentation prevents the formation of a cohesive, non-partisan national army and security apparatus, leaving the KRG vulnerable to internal power struggles and external manipulation. Dysfunctional legislature and judiciary. The KRG Parliament's legitimacy and functionality have been severely hampered. The last parliamentary election, held on the 20th of October, 2024, was significantly delayed from its original date in 2022. As of July 2025, no new KRG government has been formed, and the parliament remains largely non-functional due to ongoing KDP-PUK disputes and further legal challenges stemming from FSC rulings on election law amendments. Gov.uk, 2025, Relief Web, 2025. This institutional void means critical decisions are often made outside formal legislative processes. The judiciary, too, is widely criticized for its lack of independence, with judges often perceived as beholden to the ruling parties. Relief Web, 2025. Human rights concerns. The influence of party militias and a compromised judiciary directly contributes to a deteriorating human rights record. Organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have consistently documented abuses, including suppression of freedom of expression, arbitrary arrests, politically motivated prosecutions, and lack of accountability for abuses committed by party-affiliated security forces. Human Rights Watch, 2024, Amnesty International, 2024. 5. External influence, eroding sovereignty through patronage. The KRG's internal fragmentation is exacerbated by the significant influence wielded by regional powers, notably Iran over the PUK and Turkey over the KDP. This external patronage further erodes the KRG's independent decision-making and exacerbates its internal divisions, transforming the region into a theater for regional proxy dynamics. Iran's influence on the PUK. Iran has historically maintained strong ties with the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, PUK, particularly its leadership in Sulaymaniyah, given shared borderlands and historical alliances during the Iran-Iraq War and the Kurdish Civil War. Gunter, 2014, Wikipedia, ND. Iranian goods often dominate trade in PUK-controlled areas. Analysts argue that Iran leverages these ties to influence PUK policy, often encouraging positions that align with Iranian geopolitical interests within Iraq, sometimes at the expense of unified KRG policy or broader Kurdish national aspirations. Turkey's influence on the KDP. Similarly, Turkey has cultivated a robust relationship with the Kurdistan Democratic Party, KDP, particularly in Erbil and Duhok, driven by economic interests, for example, oil trade, Turkish investments in the KRG, and shared security concerns against the PKK. Global Panorama, 2025. Turkey has established a significant military presence in KDP-controlled areas of the KRG, with the number of permanent bases increasing from 15 in 2018 to at least 136 by early 2024, effectively creating a militarized buffer zone extending up to 40 kilometers deep in some areas. Syriac Press, 2025. This deep engagement gives Ankara significant leverage over the KDP's foreign and economic policy, at times aligning the KDP's interests more closely with Ankara than with a unified Iraqi Kurdish stance or even Baghdad. This dual external patronage system creates a fundamental weakness. Instead of acting as a cohesive federal entity with an independent foreign policy, the KRG is often pulled in conflicting directions, its internal party rivalries amplified by external patrons. This directly compromises the KRG's ability to assert its federal rights vis-à-vis Baghdad and its capacity to act as a truly sovereign sub-state entity. 6. Profound disillusionment, the loss of hearts and minds and the question of future rule. Perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of these developments is the erosion of the very patriotic sentiment that historically underpinned the KRG's rule and Kurdish national aspirations. The KDP and PUK have, since 1991, consistently invoked nationalist narratives to legitimize their rule, portraying themselves as the indispensable guardians of Kurdish rights and autonomy. However, this narrative is increasingly failing to resonate with the populace. Shifting priorities, for many Kurds, the abstract ideal of independence or heightened autonomy has been eclipsed by the tangible need for peace, financial stability, and reliable public services. The sight of civil servants going months without pay, with a history of over 50 unpaid salaries and deductions between 10 to 70% from 2014 to 2019, coupled with a dysfunctional private sector, has made the promise of stability from Baghdad increasingly attractive. Iraqi Civil Society Solidarity Initiative, 2025. Protests for federal intervention. This shift is evident in public protests, where calls for the KRG to pay salaries have increasingly transformed into demands for Baghdad to directly intervene and pay salaries, often through federal systems like My Account. Iraqi Civil Society Solidarity Initiative, 2025. Some protests have even symbolically shifted to Baghdad's Tahrir Square, an unprecedented move demonstrating a loss of faith in local leadership. A 2023 survey indicated that over 50% of respondents in the Kurdistan region would prefer the KRG be dissolved and central authority from Baghdad reasserted, reflecting intense popular frustration with the KDP and PUK's governance. Amwaj.media, 2023. Erosion of nationalist narrative and the no KRG without us fallacy. The ruling parties have historically leveraged Kurdish, Kurdish nationalism, to rally support and deflect criticism. A common rhetoric employed by the KDP and PUK is to claim that without their leadership, the Kurdistan region would cease to exist or face collapse. However, this assertion is increasingly viewed as a self-serving fallacy. The Kurdistan Region of Iraq is a legal entity enshrined in the Iraqi constitution and recognized by the international community. Its existence is not contingent on the perpetual rule of any specific party or family. Critics argue that, far from being indispensable, the entrenched, family-based rule of the KDP and PUK has, in fact, been the primary impediment to the KRI's full potential for peace, prosperity, and genuine democratic development. Their inability to transition from revolutionary movements to modern, merit-based civil administrations, focusing on public service rather than patronage, has crippled the region's progress. In this light, many disillusioned Kurds speculate that a future Kurdistan region, free from the pervasive influence and divisions fostered by the current ruling parties, could indeed achieve greater peace and prosperity, as it would allow for the emergence of truly accountable governance. 7. Speculation on the future, increased pressure on the KRI population. Given these dynamics, the future trajectory for the KRI population raises significant concerns. Unsustainability of elite corruption. The fixed payments from Baghdad, while providing salary relief, are unlikely to be sufficient to sustain the pervasive levels of corruption and illicit wealth accumulation that have characterized KRG governance. The financial spigot from independent oil sales has been largely shut off, potentially leading elites to seek alternative means of illicit enrichment. The continued inability of the ruling parties to transition to a modern civil administration model, focusing on public service rather than patronage, renders their long-term governance unsustainable in the face of dwindling resources and increasing public scrutiny. Increased taxation and resource confiscation. Faced with reduced independent revenues and a continuous demand for illicit funds by ruling elites, the KRG may resort to burdening its population more heavily. This could manifest as a significant increase in local taxes, income, property, services, and an escalation of illegal confiscation of natural resources, particularly land grabbing. vulnerable populations or those outside the immediate influence of the ruling families may find their properties seized for development projects linked to party-affiliated companies. Resurgence of oil black market. While major pipeline exports are controlled, the incentive for a significant increase in smaller-scale, illicit oil black market activities to neighboring countries, for example, via trucking routes to Iran or Turkey, could rise. This would be driven by the need for untraceable funds by powerful individuals or factions outside federal oversight, further destabilizing local economies and fostering criminality. Lack of protection for the population. Crucially, the recent financial agreement, being primarily a fiscal and administrative arrangement, contains no inherent mechanisms to protect the Kurdistan population from potential oppression by the PUK and KDP. It does not address judicial independence, human rights abuses, or the systemic issues of party militias and the lack of political accountability. The relief on salaries, while vital, does not necessarily translate into improved governance or protection of civil liberties. The population remains vulnerable to the authoritarian tendencies of the ruling parties, with limited avenues for recourse within the compromised KRG judicial system or through the financially leveraged federal government. 8. Conclusion. The Kurdistan region of Iraq stands at a critical juncture. While constitutionally still a federal entity, the practical realities of its governance have fundamentally shifted. The 2017 referendum proved to be a geopolitical misstep, leading to territorial and financial losses. Subsequently, chronic internal institutional weaknesses, deeply rooted in the 1994 Civil War and the subsequent Green and Yellow Zone divisions, exacerbated by entrenched familial and party rule and pervasive external influences from Iran and Turkey, have created a fertile ground for Baghdad's strategic reassertion of central authority. The latest financial agreement, while offering a desperately needed salary lifeline, simultaneously deepens the KRG's financial dependence and centralizes control, further diminishing its autonomy. Crucially, the KRG is facing a profound crisis of legitimacy stemming from the loss of its population's hearts and minds. The very people who once championed independence are now prioritizing basic financial security and peace, even if it means greater integration with Baghdad. This erosion of patriotic sentiment, fueled by years of corruption, misgovernance, and the inability of the KDP and PUK to transition to modern civil administration, leaves the ruling elites with a dwindling moral mandate. The self-serving rhetoric that the KRG's existence hinges on their continued rule is increasingly exposed as a fallacy. The region is a legal entity whose potential for peace and prosperity is arguably hindered by its current governance model. Indeed, one must question whether the KRG, with truly proper and independent institutions, could have far more effectively utilized its abundant human and natural resources to develop robust government and private sectors, including hybrid models, not merely to pay salaries but to build a truly purposeful and prosperous Kurdistan region. Without genuine internal governance reform, a decisive move towards institutional legitimacy, and a renewed commitment to public welfare over familial gain, the concerns for the KRG's future, characterized by continued elite self-enrichment, increased pressure on its population, and a diminished federal status, remain acutely present. The federal region risks becoming an empty shell, its people caught between an oppressive internal elite and an increasingly assertive central government, profoundly disillusioned with the promise of autonomy.